have improvised in the past? Any of you?
Try.
Okay. It's just a fascinating thing to ponder, because I think the assumption for most people is that people who improvise were born that way. That they just sort of got as a holy sparklies when they came out of the womb and been able to improvise ever since, and really that's not true. Anybody who improvised probably learned how, just like we learned to type, step by step. Even jazz players learn to play jazz lick by lick. They just learn one little lick at a time and develop a repertoire of those. Like this is a lick. Yeah, sure. Just a little thing like that is a lick. Something that, a little figure. But that's not new either. Baroque music is full of licks that were associated with affect. So this little motif that you hear in Bach was supposed to depict joy or evoke a sense of joy. So composers would put that in intentionally, that particular thing. So, but this, it can be learned by anyone. It's just a matter of learning, of starting. A student said, what do I do if I have to write a piece for brass and organ and band instruments? What do I do? I said, just, period, start, period. That's it. And that's the same thing with grad school, just start. At some point you'll be done and go, oh, I'm done. But anyway, with improvisation, it's just a matter of going through this process of learning how to do it and letting go. Because we grow up in this culture that most of us come from very well paper trained. We come that way. We read it on the page and that's what we do. And to go beyond that is just like scary as all get out, because we've never done it. But again, this is kind of unique in that it's not a classical music thing to be paper trained, because keyboard players in Baroque era used figured bass, where they would make their part up just on a series of symbols, not unlike a chord chart that is used now, except for the number 6 means 2 different things, depending upon if you're reading a jazz chart or a Baroque figured bass. But it's really the same thing. You get clues, or cues rather, and a basic sense of what harmony everyone's going to play when you're in an ensemble. And you learn how to fill in the notes to create the figured bass. But some of it comes more easily for some than others. Now, I'm one of those that still hangs on to that right and left brain theory. Have you heard those? The left brain people are the feel. They just go through life feeling, exploring, and don't worry. They don't need a path. They can create it. They explore, and they go by intuition. The left brain, I'm mirroring for you, of course, because this is your left side. The left brain, people need order and experience. They go by what they've known and what they see, and sequential, and all those things. So reading music is where those people tend to live. What they know is what they've heard, and what they can hear is what they see on a page. Left-brainers, music just happens. They can just make it up. And I used to play in a rock band. There, I said it out loud! And things would just happen. I just would blindly go onto the keyboard and just fumble around until it sounded cool. And then I go, oh, I like that. Then I would just sort of memorize where my fingers were without really knowing what it was either. So that's one extreme to the other. So somewhere in the middle is where we need to learn. So people that, my right brain, is really huge. So for me, I'd much rather make it up than read off a page. That's the part that makes me stressed out doing recital. In fact, I even gave up doing recitals. I don't do them anymore. Because I'd much rather make it up. And I'm much more interested in helping people sing with what I do on the keyboard anyway. So a recital is a whole different thing in my mind. And I don't need to worry about that. We've got Isabel Damers in the world who just blow our minds at it, So, anyway, but people in the left brain, like Mike Ham, need to learn how to harness that it just happens into something more, so that I can actually see something and make it happen. Am I making sense? So I think the total geniuses in history, the Mozarts and Bach, had both. I think their heads were like this, maybe like they see in Star Trek episodes, where both sides of the brain were just overly developed. Well, Mozart could probably imagine an entire piece in every detail, so he'd write out his manuscripts without any corrections. And Bach could see a theme on a page and immediately imagine an entire piece as well. So I think there was that mathematical sequence. All of those, both sides of the brain were so developed that we don't understand it, most of us. So just understanding where you are in that spectrum is important when you're thinking about improvising. Because if you're a left-brainer, I think where you need to spend time is working at seeing in a mathematical way what's possible on the page, imagining something on the page and seeing it written out. For we right-brainers, what we need to do is identify, analyze what we're seeing and translate it into something very specific and not just go by chance. Because once we figure out what something is, I can take it to some other place. Like I once upon a time learned this little sequence. And I just figured it out from a gospel recording. I love the Lord, you know that gospel hymn. I memorized it off of the recording. But until I figured out what that transition was harmonically, I couldn't take it anywhere else. It only had to be with that one song. Once I figured out, oh, that's just a French augmented 6th chord. For crying out loud, I learned those in theory. And I can do it any key. Even F sharp. But it's a way of modulating up. A step is just a way of marching up a whole step, modulating up a whole step. So it became a tool instead of just something cool I found on the fingers. So just knowing where you are helps you understand where to focus and how to do the steps that are necessary to learn how to improvise. So because it's really just starting from ground zero, which is what we're supposed to do today, and starting, what do you do and how do you move forward? So like I mentioned learning to type. Have you all learned how to type? Does anybody do that anymore? Or is it all this now? Or, but I actually learned how to type, without looking at the keyboard and move really quickly. As the one high school class, I'm thinking, thank you for letting me take that. But you go J, 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 B, 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 J, B, J, B, one letter at a time. And then I-T, or whatever, just the simplest thing, over and over again. Then you add one more simple thing, do that over and over again, then you put them together and do it over and over again. It's really like that when learning to improvise. So if you think you're going to start by imagining, I'm going to improvise a whole French symphony, that's probably 10 years down the road if you spend, lots of time at it. People that do that they've been practicing and work at it constantly. When I was in Berlin studying, I had 2 teachers. One was for organ literature, and the other was for improvisation. And I had to practice 2 hours a day for each. That was that kind of, you had to put in that time to do that. So, like anything, unfortunately, you can't avoid the P word. You have to practice. But how do you start? Are you thinking that? Yes, that was what we're supposed to do. Imagine you've got an A. Something that's a little softer. Here we go. Now, if we look at let's go G. I don't know why, I just like G. You look at a hymnal, if the first note of a hymn is a G, most likely it has this chord with it, G major. But if you just isolate the pitch G, if anything, I should just have a big, huge manuscript here, just the note G, because that's what left brain people need to see. I'm guessing that's you, right? Because you said something you said earlier, right? Yeah. I had one student, just move your second finger to D. Just move your second, hold everything else, move it. Okay. Had to see it on the page. So that, for her, it was a matter of visualizing that D on a page. Anyway, so you've got a G. What other chords fit G? All of them have a different color. This is kind of stately and safe and secure.
E minor.
Which one?
E minor.
E minor? Which one? C major. That's F7, 9. Woo! eyebrows don't go up there. Check your pulse. You might be dead. What else?
G flat.
Who?
G minor.
G minor. What's that?
E flat.
E flat. It's very regal. There's more.
C minor flat six.
See, which one?
E flat six.
Oh, I love that. Mais oui, c'est très français. How about F sharp? Seven. C sharp diminished. That's very alarming, isn't it? There's probably a reason why a lot of train horns are diminished chords. Because if they were this, there might be a lot of people crashing into trains because they're just. But the point is, we look at a hymnal and see a G major chord under a G and think that's the only chord possible. A lot of hymns, not all of them, a lot of hymns weren't written with harmonies. Well, maybe the Baptist church and a lot of them were. But a lot of the tunes we sing were not. And an editor decided what the harmonies under was going to be. So that's step one, is just isolating one pitch and just experimenting with what other chords fit under it and find them with your fingers on the keyboard. And feel the effect of them. You know, there's different chords have a different effect. And that's the genius of Bach, because he knew which harmonies would sort of raise the hackles and then how to resolve it. Because that's kind of the drama of music, is you create a problem and then solve it. So that's what a good composition does. And so we have all these musical forms that do that. They create a problem, theme one, another problem, theme two, and then they fight each other, and we call that the development section. And then we step back and they make up and they're friends at the recap, and everybody's happy, right? Anyway, so step one is just doing all those different experimenting. How many different notes fit? So let's put it to work. So look at 335. Now, this is making an assumption that the stanza that you are doing this with, people would not be singing four-part harmony. So if you have a parish that does that with every hymn all the time, you might experiment by having stanza 2 all in unison as an alternative or something. Just make sure that you're not putting egg on the singer by putting a different chord on it. So you've experimented with putting chords under one note. You're supposed to like this. The last note on the end of this first phrase, the note is an F. And the editor put a nice F chord under it. You see that? If we're in F major, that makes sense. So if you want to put that to use, what other chord would fit under an F like that?
D minor.
D minor, yes. Of course, that's the obvious. Then go right back to book because you're so nervous and you're sure you get fired. But certainly, because that doesn't sound so radically different that I think it wouldn't send people away. So putting it with more orientation. By scanning to the end, and this would be the step you do at month 4, because the first 3 months you've just been adding chords to one note, right? Just pick the last note of a phrase of a hymn and imagine a different chord that's a relatively consonant chord. You know, it's not a wild and crazy chord, but just one that's other than what the book says. And try to just play it, and then go right from it without worrying about it. And then maybe 2 months later, you do it twice. So like, let's do another one, 707. For doxology. I think most churches do the doxology at some point or another. And assuming again that you're doing it in unison, people aren't singing, that would be a problem. But the last note of the first phrase is B. So what would another chord be? Right here we've got a nice G major again. B minor? E minor. Okay, let's try that. B major. Yes. That one's refreshing. Do you know why? Because it has a D sharp in the chord, and D sharp is not in the key signature this hymn. So that makes it really stand out as something unusual, which can make going on a little tricky. I mean, you have to make sure that you're safe. If you play a chord and it's got a key relationship that really contradicts the next note or two or three even, probably shouldn't do it. But in this case, I've heard Ralph Vaughan Williams does that chord in that spot. Ever wondered what's so cool about that arrangement? Just that chord just pops off the page, and you can just feel everybody going at that B major chord instead of just the usual. Or an E minor chord might, be a little bit dark too. But the B major, that really wakes you up. Let's try one more, just a finger. Anybody throw a finger to him and throw it at me, and let's have fun with it. 319, yes. Have you been to a workshop of mine before? Okay. One of my favorite spots is in this one to do this with. Because look at stanza 3, third line. Is the word ponder anew. So if you want an excuse to do something, that when you get to that third stanza, go somewhere different. So the book says, first of all, this hymn should be in G, not F. I don't know what's up with these editors. So the B flat chord for that D. That's exciting. It's okay. It's what people know. But what would be another chord?
B flat. No, I can hear it in my head.
D major. That's exciting, yes. And then you could actually stay there. Go back to so, yeah, I think that's better. Maybe you just go there with your pedal line. Don't worry about analyzing, just do. Almost done it. It's actually more than that. Harmonically, you could analyze what I just did, but just think of it as a passing tone. Sparked interest in doing that. All you have to do is pick the ending note and a different chord, and then do that. Don't do more than that for about a month or two. The more you do that kind of stuff, the less power it has to. I have to throw that in. The more anything musically that you do that's a little unusual, it becomes usual. It loses its effect. If you've got the mixtures on all the time, they don't have their effect. You have to take them off at some point. That's the other workshop. But D major. So now let's go one step further. You can always, let's go back to that first one we were looking at, 335. It's in the same neighborhood. Now we're going to change two chords. So that would be the next step. So we're like 6 months into this effort now, right? Any chord can be strengthened or set up by its dominant and really solidified. If you precede any chord with its dominant, that will make it sound absolute and very strong. So what is the dominant? Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that? So what's the dominant of C major?
G.
G, right. What's the dominant of E minor? B major. So it's what we call a 5 chord, so it's the dominant. So we've got 2 chords, 5 and 1, or a dominant and a new tonic. I hope they don't lose you in this, just because of the jargon. It's really just one chord relates to the other. And so what happens for those 2 chords is we go to another key. And then afterwards you just go back. So if we've ended this first line with a D minor chord, what is its dominant? A, right. So D minor, its dominant is this. Dominants are powerful because you can't just walk up to the keyboard and go, turn the organ off and go home. You'll raise everybody's heart rate. Ambulance is what we call it. In ambulance, one leads to the next one so powerfully. That's why it's called dominant, because it really does, it's so dominant. Of course, the 7 goes down, so almost think if you're a theory person, do not ignore what I just said. So we're going to land on D minor. We want to have the second to the last note of that phrase be an A chord, A7 chord. And you have to check, is the note in the melody part of an A7 chord? Because if it's not, it won't work. It is. So it's the 7th, which is powerful, and it resolves down. 7ths like to resolve down. If you try to resolve a 7th up, it's like trying to pull 2 magnets apart. It's just harder. But this is perfect. The 7th is on the top, and it comes down. So that's perfect. Track that. So it's 2 chords. And for those 2 moments, we have left the key of F major rather, and gone to D minor. So we have A major to D minor. Then we go back down. Of course, you could, if you're feeling frisky, add a 3rd new chord and begin the next phrase in D minor. So you've changed 3. And I think what you'll be shocked with is that you survive. And that the congregation isn't thrown by that, unless you're singing harmony, of course, then you don't want to do it. So here's what that would sound like. So that's not a radically different change. And I think one that really helps sometimes keep things going. It helps add a little bit of oomph to something.
And you could keep D minor through the couple measures.
Yes, you can. In fact, you're jumping the gun here, but you can harmonize an entire hymn in its relative minor most of the time, which works in some cases. All right. Since we brought this up, I'm sure this hymn is in there. Blessed be the time that finds. 267. Tomorrow?
I said that would be sad to do that one in a minor key.
Well, take a look at the text. If it's the same text here. Yeah. Is there a stanza where that would make sense?
Yeah.
Sure does. Of course, I've thought about this ahead of time. So this hymn is hard to go on. So the 3rd stanza, go to D minor. Now D minor doesn't work for there, does it? So then I figure something out. So I'd have to probably go to F for that one measure, because F, C, F doesn't work when you're playing a D minor chord. So I'd go like this. point of the stanza is that we come out of that woe, isn't it? That was one of the assignments we had in Germany, is we had to harmonize the hymn in its relative key. So if it's a minor hymn, you harmonize it in its relative major, which works with Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence, or Wondrous Love.
We did it Sunday with When I Survey. When I Survey.
Yeah. Yeah. And you'll see a lot of composers, if you look at hymn concertato settings, they do that sort of thing frequently. One stanza's basically harmonized in its relative key. But you can see though, oh, there are more tricks. Let's go to 158. And that's Jesus shall reign. Sometimes using that secondary dominant or applied dominant, that's what we call that. When you change the two chords and one of them's a dominant, you might remember that from theory class, secondary dominant or applied dominants. They just mean they're not in the primary key. They're just something else. They can help boost a congregation to a high note. Okay, because it's a little bit of woo woo to this. So this one goes all the way up to E flat. I've never seen this in E flat. Usually it's in D. This is great. They don't usually go up. Let's see. So anyway, we got this. So that high note is another E flat chord. So what other chord can we put there?
Minor.
C minor, right? And then can we follow, precede it? I mean, with its dominant. So what's the dominant of C minor?
G7.
Which one?
G7.
Yeah. So here's what the book says again. So we want to go to C minor. That's cool already, you know. But you can also precede the C minor with something that helps the congregation get a little bit of goose. Secondary dominant written into the book. You see the A natural at the end of that first line is a secondary dominant. That is the dominant to the last chord. It just helps strengthen that because A natural is not in the key signature B flat. And it sets up that B flat as very solid. And that particular one is the most common. When the last chord is the dominant chord of the regular key you're in. And raise your hand if you're getting lost. I can even simplify it even more, but I hate to talk over people and I hate to under-talk too. Both are kind of offensive sometimes. But we're in the key of E flat. Its dominant is B flat. So when you land on a B flat chord, if you want to strengthen it, you do it with an F chord, which is the dominant chord of B flat. So that's written right in there. And one little parenthetical trick for doing something different from the book itself is just take accidentals out when you see them. If it's not the melody. So in this case, that would create a minor that would sound like this. Something similar in the next line just to bless that. Did you track what I did?
Yes.
So I didn't play A natural, I played A flat. But then in this one, the next chord, E flat major, I also played B flat minor. If you didn't understand that, let it go. It's not that critical. But you could look over in 159, Fairest Lord Jesus, that E natural is another secondary dominant. You see that? See how smart you're getting already? Both of those E flats are secondary dominants. That you could leave out if you wanted to. Okay, so this is you've been experimenting with this, and I feel like you're all getting this part already. So what do you do next? Harmonize more. Just more than one chord, write out a melody, or better yet, experiment harmonizing a melody. You don't have to think about the melody. So probably the scale. Harmonize the D major scale. D major is a good one to start with because the F sharp and the C sharp keep your fingers oriented. You kind of know where you are, where the third and where the seventh of those leading tones are, without thinking too hard about it. But this is how it usually goes. The first time I put two different colors so that your brain can separate them. Here's the scale. D major, A, D major again, G, back to D, to G, A7, fifth of the bass. We can do F sharp, to B minor, to A, to E minor, D major first inversion, A. So do you hear all the possibilities with that? Here's how it usually goes when a student starts. Stop. Yes! It can take a long time to get from one to the next when you're at the keyboard trying to do that. It's okay, go with that. I mean, don't be flustered by that, just keep going. And just arrive at chords. And here's the good news. You can harmonize any melody with just the three chords, 1, 4, and 5. So we keep D major, G, and A. You can harmonize any note within that key with those three chords alone. So you can just do that. And think, if you're left brain type, just think if the second note of the scale is an E, think what are the chords that contain an E, and then so A major does, so you play the A chord. Just go through the whole scale. Make sense? Don't worry about how many fingers you're playing yet. I mean, you can get scrutiny, you can tighten raise the bar, I mean, and only do 4 parts, but that can come much, much later. I think for now, just getting things out. Then, of course, from there, actually, I forgot a simpler melody. Before the scale is a melody that's even more fun to play with, Amen. 2-note melody. Amen. You can have all kinds of different chords. If we have 2 Ds, you can have C major, you can also have E flat to G, you can have F9 to G, or C minor, or A. That sounds very French. It's just experimenting with those. And an important step for right-brained people like me, is to think what is the chord you're going to play. Don't just do it with fingers alone. Have your brain identify it first and then find it with your fingers. Because I used to just be able to come up with chords without thinking about what they are, just to play. That's what I need to do, is to stop and analyze. That's the way I'm going to learn to see something coming and actually be able to play it. So then go to harmonizing the scale. And you can put the melody in different places. This is a helpful thing too. Do a scale with the melody in the left hand. Yeah, why not? Let's jump to that. That wasn't part of my plan, but I think I just brought it up and I did it this morning. So you're going to realize it's not a big deal as they sound like. People love toccatas. If you've got a congregational meeting after the service and you want to get something passed, do a toccata. Of course, the most famous one we know is this. Based on one of the simplest melodies. That sounds like something maybe your grade school orchestra would do, you know. The thing about toccatas is just the melody and the bass. And harmonizing it with the hands. But instead of just playing chords in the hands, you just go down, back up, really fast. If you want to show off, add a sixth, then that makes it sound really French, right? And if you want to really show off, so let's say the hymn is Joy to the World. Quite that blatantly. So then, just alternating two chords: D major, E minor. Come up with a whole piece.
You said D major and E minor?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a pretty
And you
common.
never introduced any other chord as you went?
Sure you can. And here's the thing about that. If you're just starting out doing those, you probably do wind up playing just the two chords because you're kind of mortified doing that much. But eventually you're going to get bored with that. Love that boredom thing because that's what drives you into the next thing. And the simplest thing with pedal, when you got the melody done, just make wherever you land the new tonic. So if you do like this, that is tonic. So just imagine a different chord. Do the same process we did before. So if the last note is D, what would another chord be? A random one.
G.
G would be kind of boring.
Yeah. B minor.
How about B flat major?
Yeah.
So we'd have this. Then you're in B flat minor. You've opened that door, you've walked in, so you have to go on in that new key. Back to D major, and I'm going to go on from there. Do you see? You don't have to with toccatas, you don't have to worry about going through the circle of fifths to get to new key. You just kind of go. And I like John Ferguson's, he described a good modulation once. It's just lift off old key, down on new. Instead of going dee-da, getting the escalator going and then stepping off at some point, just go there. Anyway, so that learning to harmonize something, it's one of the most freeing abilities, the most helpful abilities for improvising that you can develop. And it's, the only way to do it is just by begin doing it and start with simple things and grow and add new things that you're doing. Eventually what you want to do is, what you can do is write the melody of a hymn out on a manuscript paper where you don't have anything under it and harmonize from that. And if you're starting with that, don't worry if your fingers are finding what you probably learned with that hymn over time. You're still making your brain go through the process. So it might be helpful to pick a hymn that you know and to do that. But that it's just one of the most helpful abilities. And it's not a big deal. It's not rocket science. It's not this massive gift. It's something that can be easily developed. Now to go with that, and I never leave enough time for this. Yes?
It's not really improvisation, but I do a lot of odd things with the pedal part, just filling in.
Like passing tones?
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure.
And longer at the end of phrases and stuff. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm doing something.
Yeah, that's fine. That's good. Nothing wrong with that. Unless you do it all the time. You know the cliche of the circle of fifths modulation that goes up a half step, and the congregation goes, again with the half step. I think the more you do one particular thing, the less effect it's going to have. So always with anything, a little goes a long way. Secondary dominance, using those applied dominant, a little of that goes a long way too. I think it's more of a good exercise to develop the ability to do it, but then don't do it all the time. It begins to sound kind of cliche. And you know what the word cliche means? That's from the old printing press. Cliche, 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 cliche. Where it just pumps out the same thing. You got to vary that stuff. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to talk about is counterpoint. Oops, I forgot to hear. Counterpoint is another really critically important skill to develop. It's not as critical as harmony. Harmonizing is probably the most beneficial thing you can teach yourself to do. But counterpoint is when you have the melody in one hand and then a melody against it. So just two. Alice Parker calls it the answering voice. They're both equal melodies if you do it right. One's not just a harmonization, it's an equal melody. It has just as much interest. A beautiful melody has a gorgeous shape, interesting shape to it. It's not stuck in one little range. It maybe has a high point and then floats down. It's on its way somewhere and then comes away from that point. The perfect melody. My favorite example of that is the Brahms, How Lovely Is Thy Dwelling Place. How lovely is thy dwelling place, O Lord. So the most important word is the highest note, even in German, and it floats down from there. The same attribute should be in this counter melody. And the word counter is important. So that whatever the melody does, the one other voice should do the opposite. So if the melody goes up, the counter melody you put to it should go down. If the melody moves a lot, the counter melody can stay put. If the melody stops, the free melody can move. So let's look at hymn 64. And this is what I call with my students tedium, going through the steps to develop the ability to do this without being scared to death. First of all, it's very important to teach yourself not to stop. That is probably one of the hardest things at first. So again, two different colors. Right hand's going to have melody. So just working with that alone. We start with using quarter notes for the free voice. So since the melody goes up, I'm going to go down. Because as the melody landed back down its E flat, I went up with the free voice. Oh, but I had an eighth note, so I wasn't supposed to do that. So your step is to do quarter notes. Then you do eighth notes. Then you do triplet eighths. Then you do sixteenths. I mean, each step probably takes a month.
Well, do most of yours end up being descants like that above?
A good descant is the same thing, yes.
Right.
And not all of them do that, but the best, the ones that work the best, if you were to analyze them, I bet you'd notice that they were almost always doing the opposite of the melody. That if the melody's going up, the descant goes down. As the melody goes down, the descant rises. And those are the spots, or even the spots within a descant that are the strongest. And that there's one high point. Descants make the mistake of going high and then kind of staying there. We're going to the high note 6 times. And I would tell the composition students when I taught that class at the Luther Seminary, pick one of them that you want, the one that's the most important high note, and keep that one and find an alternative for the other ones, because it'll make that one stand out as even better. But anyway, it's the same thing. You just try to have variety. But when you're doing this as exercise, you don't have to worry about going above or below it. It's 2 different instruments. So you don't have to, there's no hierarchy to pitch. So you can start. yourself keep going, and just hopefully you'll land somewhere. You can also just leave. The next step would be the 8 notes. A little higher. Then triplets, which is even easier with this one because it has 8 note triplets in the melody. You notice I did 8 notes against the triplets instead of just doing mere triplets. That's actually pretty hard. So if you find that difficult, the 16th notes tend to be mostly scales and little sequences. Now notice I didn't stop when I made the mistake. But what you can do is if you make a mistake like that, when you do the repeat, do it again. And it blesses it, then people think it's intentional. And they start looking at the text. Oh, I know what that was. That was the fail up never thing. So then, in the end, what you do after you've gone through all of those steps, you do the quarter note, 8th note, triplet 8th, 16th, put them all together. Try to keep moving up and down, an interesting contour to both. If you make a mistake, you go with it.
You never pedal when you do those?
I think it's probably enough
Okay.
to do that. You could. You could do
No, I could.
the melody with the pedal. And then another step, the one we did in Germany after this, was trios, which is pedal and 2 voices. It's not. It's hard. It's hard. But this just sort of helps raise the awareness of how 2 melodies work together, or work with each other, hand in hand. It's 2 beautiful melodies. One is the given, the other is up to you. But here's the good thing about that. When you're improvising, there are no mistakes. Sometimes there are some surprise turns, but you just go with them. But what's important when you're practicing is that you learn to keep going. Because a lot of students, when they're doing this, they stop. Or they stumble, or then they practice. What they learn is how to stumble, and they learn how to stop. So when you're suddenly in a public setting and you have the itch to do that, that's what you've learned to do. Anyway, so it's important to keep going no matter what, even if it's ugly. So a step past that would be to come up with one phrase over and over again to where you do the same thing with the free voice, and you like it. And what happens is the first 10 times you only find 2 beats that you like. The second 10 times you find half a measure that you really like, or 2 full measures that you really like. You know what I mean? So just over and over again, you find little spots that work, and you come back to them. And so it's just, think of it as like creating a sculpture out of a block of stone. You just chip away a little bit of the crud each time you come back. And again, this is practicing. We're not talking about during the service. This is when you're learning how to improvise. So you chip a little bit of the crud off, and eventually you get to something you really like, and it's the same each time. But you've arrived at it by exploring. And you can turn that into an entire piece. Here's a hymn that it's not in this book. What God ordains is truly, well, how they translate the next line, is always right. And my pastor says, who God ordains is always right. So I'm going to put something against that. I'm going to put an interesting, I like to use gap registration 16, 4, and 1. And I'll put the oboe up in the actually, we can make that more interesting. Add the sesqui to it. Or the 2-foot. Sorry, it's just that I can't help it. Try that. I know it would work. This. 1 foot with a 32-foot reed. Sorry, that was just a light head moment. I'm back now. So I'm back to the oboe. So here's the counterpoint I'm going to do with that first phrase. Just that much. So what you don't know is that I've spent the last 2 weeks arriving at that. Right? I've just gone over and over again, and this starts low and goes up, this starts high and comes down. So they basically do this. So what I'm going to do is make that my ritornello. So I'm going to play that between every phrase. But it's going to be in a different key each time. So that I learn it in tonic. I'm going to try it in B flat. And dominant, of course. And a real test of a ritornello, relative minor. There are 4 phrases in this hymn. I'm going to introduce it with the ritornello and tonic, play it with the melody, and then I just have to do free material after I play what I memorized. Then, in between each phrase, I'm going to play that ritornello in a key, any key other than tonic. And usually where I land. So here's how it goes. Now with the melody. Think of it less in terms of how you're going to put it into the service. It's just exercise to learn how to do counterpoint. And I call that what we just talked about, usually in students that I've taught a year, to do all those steps of counterpoint. So I'm just tempering how quickly you think you might pick it up. Maybe not. Maybe your right brain, and it'll come really fast. But those two facets of improvising, I think, developing those skills are the two that really just open up all kinds of doors. Then you can start to apply them. I think both of them fit no matter what style of music you're playing.
And do you write down your really good ideas? Because I'll get these wonderful ideas, then they're gone.
Well, my theory over my years with that is that the ones that I work out, that I play over enough, that they tend to come back. The ones that aren't that good tend to not come back. But in my case, yeah, I mean, everybody's journey is going to be different, but over time, I have played things fairly the same way and wind up writing them out. And then Augsburg says, can we publish those? In fact, my first organ book came out when I was in Germany studying improvisation. I was so excited I got the proofs. And I showed my improvisation teacher, and she goes, oh. You're going to use a pseudonym, aren't you? Because this is stuff that all organists are supposed to just be able to do. Improvise on the spot. And so she thought I was publishing a cheater's book. That you wouldn't want your name on that, would you? But no, it's different over in the States. It's not the same. The German organists couldn't get a job, even a simple job, without the ability to put the melody in the soprano, tenor, and bass, harmonize it 3 or 4 different ways, and improvise a trio, fugue, and several other forms that they just had to be able to do. And of course, for a lot of the organists, what they did wasn't that great. It didn't sound like J.S. Bach all the time. But it's still just a matter of, it's kind of like learning to do paint by numbers. You see a tune, and then you have the certain skeleton that you fit it into musical form, and it's not rocket science. And that's what the French, it's the same in French. It's just more harmonically complicated. A good book for that is Dupre's Treatise on Improvisation. I think they've both been translated into English from French by John Fenstermaker, published by Schirmer. But in those books, you have pages and pages of simple melodies to work with. If you want to go to those next levels, just pages and pages of 4-bar, 4-measure-long melodies. So any questions? Yes?
I've been working through your book.
Yes.
Love it. My problem
Here's
is
the button.
the other parts of my job get in the way of me sitting there. So how much of what you've gone through this afternoon am I going to find?
Everything. The first half of this book is stuff you could go home and do next week. The second half is that long-term tedium. And it's actually step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3. And with examples through it. Yeah, that's what this is. But there are some quick things that for introducing hymns, for example, which is one of the workshops this week that I'll be doing. A list of 17 ideas that you can improvise very simply, introductions to hymn, instead of just playing the first and last line or the little bracket sections, just to do something even more creative and evocative than first and last line. But no, it's all in there. It's all in there. And if I ever hear of anybody actually going beginning to end and succeeding, I just want to go, yay! And this is the process I learned in Germany. Was that it's a very Germanic approach. The French do something a little different. But it's amazing how much can be done. Very simple ideas. Like, did you know you could go to any chord by doing an augmented chord? You just augment. You can go just about anywhere with this. You can go here, or it's just play around with that sometimes. It's just amazing. And Dupre's book has a whole thing on that, just the augmented chord, and 2 pages of options to go with that one little alteration. And that would be another step, as you alter the melody a little bit. There's the melody. You could do, just change one note, or see if it takes you somewhere else by changing the last note. Just go down the whole step instead, now you're in a different key. It's just a lot of fun to play with, man. That's all this is just playing. So go home and play. That's all you have to do. Any other questions? Great. That means I either covered it all.